Hi, I'm Anthony.
And I'm Nicole.
And this is
Life with Twins.
So I feel like we've finally gone through this whole long journey of going through the IUIs and prepping for the IVF. And finally, we will go ahead and give you guys the final day of what it was like before Nicole got pregnant, the transfer, all the goods. Now, just want to apologize because this should have gone through last week. However, we had some technical difficulties and the videos that we shot, they were deleted. Now, because this one is going to be a longer episode, we actually broke this up into 2 parts. So immediately following this one, they'll release on the same day so you guys can go ahead and watch the second episode. So that way you guys don't feel overwhelmed with too much video of us. So we'll have 2 less than 15-minute videos
in case we're
for you.
too much in one whole segment. We broke it up into 2.
Absolutely. So please enjoy. But Nicole, you are the star of the show, so start us off.
So last episode, we talked about our ERA biopsy, which basically told us how receptive we were to the progesterone. And we found out that after 114 hours of being on the progesterone, that my lining it's the prime time for my lining. So basically what that told the doctors was, okay, so if we schedule her transfer to be at 2:30 p.m. on October 8th, then 114 hours from that would be 8:30 p.m. on October 3rd. And so you have to take your progesterone at 8:30 every night consistently, and then at 2:30 on October 8th, my lining is the most adequate and prime for these little guys to be transferred. Leading up to, I don't know if we covered it in the biopsy episode or not, but when I initially started taking progesterone, they are progesterone injections that you have to take basically in your butt. And the progesterone is an oil. And so it's very, very thick. And the first round that I did for the biopsy, the progesterone was in sesame oil. Mm-hmm. And I just remember doing the injection, because sometimes Anthony would work at night, so he wasn't able to do injections for me. And so I just remember pushing as hard as I could on that plunger to get that oil in, and it took it wasn't minutes, but it was a lot of seconds.
It's not like just and it's in. It was when I was doing it, I was sitting there and it's quivering. Now I am weak, but at the same time though, it was impressive how hard you had to push to get all that oil in. And I was just thinking God, that has to hurt when it goes into Nicole.
And at first it didn't bother me. Of course you get a little bit of pain with the initial injection. They gave me these numbing patches that I would put on 30 minutes before the injection, and that really would help with the initial I'm giving myself a shot sting kind of thing. So that definitely did help. But the oil was very thick. I hadn't started developing welts yet with the biopsy, but I did notice that the more that I was taking it, the more I would start having random numbness in my face.
Yeah.
And
that freaked us out when that first happened, because the next day you were just I don't know what to do.
It didn't start right away, but definitely after day 3 or 4, I noticed that I was getting numbness. And it started just kind of being in my face, and then eventually it went down my arm. And so then I reached out to them, and I was I feel very confident in where I'm giving these injections. Mm-hmm. I know where to give them in order to not hit my nerve. I don't think I'm hitting a nerve, and I'm not developing welts enough to where the welts would be pinching my nerve. And so they thought that maybe it was the sesame oil. Maybe I was having some sort of reaction to it. So when it came to the transfer, they changed my oil. And so my oil was an ethanol based oil, which was a little bit thinner. So it was a little bit easier to give that injection. But when I noticed when we did the transfer, I was just starting this new oil. I hadn't taken it with the biopsy. So I took it with a new oil for the transfer. And I noticed, like, as I'm giving the injection, because it is thinner, after I pulled the needle out, I was getting some seepage of oil. And so then I, of course, started to freak out. And I'm just like, they specifically found that I need to have this much progesterone and I need it for this many hours in order to be receptive. And I'm just like freaking out. I'm messaging them. Do I need to...
It's so weird that you would freak out about something like that. Because, like, at no other time during your pregnancy...
Have I ever freaked out?
Have you ever worried about anything?
I've never freaked out about nothing. Yeah. But I messaged them and I was just like, do I need to get my progesterone levels checked? Like, what's going on? And they're like, really? Like, the amount of progesterone that you are losing is probably minimal. And if we checked your progesterone, it wouldn't really tell us much. I'm like, okay, fine.
Right.
I'll breathe.
Yeah.
So that oil definitely did help a little bit. I still had some, like, obviously we had to continue the oil up until 12 weeks of pregnancy. And I did notice that, like, as I continued with the oil, I did start getting that, like, numbness again. But that very well could have been because I started getting welts. But enough about that. When it came to our transfer, we were very anxious. I was very anxious. And there were a lot of concerns that I had as far as, like, getting to the transfer. Because we decided that since we went through this biopsy, we knew exactly the prime time that my lining was receptive, that we felt drawn to putting in both embryos. Anthony, from my very first IUI, he was like, how cool would it be if we had twin boys? Like, I would love twin boys. And so when we found out that we only had 2 embryos and that those 2 embryos were boys, it felt destined and like an answer to our prayers for us to put them both in. And so also with the finances of if we put one in and it doesn't work and we have to pay another like $3,000 to put the other one in, it's kind of like a buy one, get one free in a sense.
But the other thing too was the fact that if we were to put just one in and it did take, and then we ended up getting pregnant on our own in between that time, well, how long are we going to keep that in storage just sitting there before we actually implant it? So it was really hard. And one of the things that we kind of thought about was, you know, if we were, you know, we talked with our pastor and he was like, well, you're supposed to have the amount that you're supposed to have. So whether you put in 1 at a time or 2 at a time, you're going to get...
God will bless us with
what we're supposed to have. So that kind of gave us a little bit of peace and, you know, understanding to be like, well, you know what, let's do this. If we're supposed to have both, we're going to get both.
If we're supposed to have one, we're supposed to have one. Whether we put both of them in at the same time or 1 at a time. But of course, more fears came. I was definitely fearful that, you know, our embryos wouldn't thaw, because I've, you know, did a lot of Googling. Of course, I do Googling.
She's an expert at it.
Yes. And found that, you know, some people have lost their embryos through the thawing process. One of my patients said that her embryo, when they were thawing it, it's very rare, but it ended up going up into the oil and it was unable to be like used
salvaged
at that time.
It's unsalvageable at that point.
It's damaged at that point. So leading up to it, I was very nervous about our embryos thawing, the transfer itself, because with my biopsy, they had such a hard time getting through my cervix that I was told that the embryos are only good thawed for an hour. So you have an hour to get into the doctor's office for them to get you into the procedure room for them to transfer the embryos. And with my last transfer, or with my biopsy, it took like 20 minutes just to get through my cervix.
Right.
And so I was very nervous about that happening and losing our embryos because of the inability to get through my cervix. So those were some of my fears leading up to it.
So what we should do is, since this one is going to be a longer discussion of how everything went through, why don't we just go ahead and end this video here? And then what we'll do is, if you guys have time to watch the second video, go ahead and click on the next video and you guys can see the rest of the transfer process and everything from there. So we'll see you on the next video.
Look alive, boys. Look alive.